Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the call-in show for mobile home park owners. This is Joanne Stevens, and I'm going to encourage everybody to ask questions and participate. If you want to ask a question, just hit *6 and you'll be unmuted and can ask your question. Before we get started, I want to make a few announcements. The newsletter, the March newsletter for community owners will be up on the website this afternoon, and the website is joannemstevens.com. Also, want to remind people to look at their calendars and plan to attend the Sellers Symposium in December 11th and 12th here in Cedar Rapids. At that event, we'll have experts covering topics like capital gains taxes, partnerships, and we'll have a workshop on what is your park worth. So all the attendees will leave with a good idea of what their park is worth in today's market. So it's a very dynamic market these days, and I really encourage owners to know what their mobile home park asset is worth. So today's topic, partnership questions or partnerships, that is a very dynamic topic also. And in the real estate business, whether it's mobile home parks or any kind of real estate investing, we tend to have a lot of partnerships. And those can be either friends forming partnerships or family forming partnerships to invest together. And the conventional wisdom has always been, well, when you invest with your family members or your friends, then you're investing with people that you trust with your life, so certainly you would trust with the money. And that's all well and good, but partnerships do run their course. And that's one reason why people sometimes end up selling their mobile home parks or their other real estate investments because the partnership does run their course. And so it's become, one idea that I want to start with is if you do not currently have a partnership agreement and you have a partner, even if it's just one partner, and maybe that partner is a close friend or a parent or a son or daughter or a brother or sister, whatever the case may be, you really need to have a partnership agreement. And the reason you need to have a partnership agreement is because of the inevitable time when you disagree on something. The partnership agreement will spell out what do you do when you disagree, because owning a mobile home park or any real estate investment should be about making your life better, not making it more difficult with partners that you don't see eye to eye with or you don't agree on things. So make your life better, make your partner's life better, make your cash flow smooth, and plan for the long term so you don't back yourself into a corner where you feel like you just have to sell or have to somehow, you and your partner have to dissolve the partnership. If you don't have a partnership agreement, don't feel alone, because in my experience of selling a lot of parks over a lot of years, it is rare to find a park owner that does have a partnership agreement. And when I started in this business, I didn't have a partnership agreement either. I'd never heard of a partnership agreement. And looking back over a 25-year time in this business, I think a lot of time and duress and angst could have been avoided by having a good partnership agreement. So one idea would be for you to talk to your accountant or your attorney about getting a partnership agreement, and that will describe certain things about who's going to do what and what is the process if you disagree on how to run the property, how to conduct the business, how to split the profits, what to do if you refinance the property and have the cash, how do you, or have a lot of cash, how do you split that up? So I want to, I'll make a few more remarks as we go on, but please feel free to ask a question. This is a call-in show. Okay, go ahead.
So my partner and I, we split the cash flow down the middle. The problem is my wife and I work about 65 hours a week on the park, where my partner only spends about 10 hours a week. Should there be a different split as far as the cash flow goes?
Well, the fact that you asked the question, that sounds like you think that there ought to be a different split. What are your thoughts about that, and how long have you been thinking that the split ought to be different?
Yeah, I'm thinking it should be different. I have been for a little while now. I'm just not quite sure how it should be split down.
So is there any agreement, or has there ever been even a verbal agreement of who's going to do what with your in your park?
Not exactly, no.
So, and how long have you been in business?
About 2 years.
Okay, okay. Well, it sounds like, and do you have a good attorney that could help you with a partnership agreement?
Right now, I don't know.
Okay, okay. Well, I think that would be the first thing, to find either an attorney or an accountant that has a lot of experience with business and forming businesses, and in most markets there are, excellent attorneys that can really help you a lot. And have you broached this subject at all with your partner?
Not yet, no.
Okay, okay. So a lot of times what you find is that his point of view might be completely different from yours. For example, sometimes you have a partnership where the one who's putting in a lot of hours, the other partner feels like, well, maybe they're putting in more hours, but I was the person who came up with the idea to do that, to buy this asset, and I put in more money than the other partner did. And so in his mind, his or her mind, they might be feeling like it's perfectly fair the way the cash flow is being split. So before things heat up too much, it probably would be good to tell your partner that it's time to get a partnership agreement. And but I would check around and get recommendations from other business owners in your area as to who is really the best.
Okay.
And probably in your market, if there's, for example, apartment owners or storage garage owners that own a lot of properties like that or have partnerships, they probably could recommend a very good attorney for you. And also sometimes bankers know very good attorneys. And sometimes there's even mediators that can help real estate partners structure a fee agreement or a partnership agreement where you both have your say, you both have input as to what goes into it, so that you end up with an agreement that you both feel as good as you possibly can feel about it, knowing that life isn't perfect. Does that help?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, is there another question?
Joanne, we have a write-in from Michelle. Michelle would like to know, she'd like a story. She wants to hear your worst partnership story.
Well, okay. Well, Michelle, thank you for the question. That's a great question. There are a great many horror stories, and I, I read a lot of business publications, and there's a lot of bad stories there. But I would say probably the worst partnership story that I can recall is when there was a family, a very good family. They were just wonderful, wonderful people. And there was a mother and father who founded the business, and they owned quite a few businesses. But they did build a park, and their kids took over the park to some extent. I mean, the parents were still involved, but the day-to-day things were mostly their adult children. The problem was when one of the adult children, very sharp person, got a divorce, and the founding mother and father felt like they did not really trust, even before the divorce, they just felt like they did not trust their, in this case, the daughter-in-law, with the money, that they'd been around enough businesses for enough of their own businesses for many, many years, and they had more or less seen it all, and so they more or less felt compelled to sell their park because they didn't want to, they wanted to retire, they didn't want to be so hands-on with the business, they wanted to, they had a second home, they wanted to fish and just more or less enjoy life. But that was, I thought, a little bit sad that this very fine family felt forced to sell their park because of an in-law situation where they just didn't trust their daughter-in-law to be around the park business because there was so much money involved. So there's others too, but that's the one that is top of mind. It's a family that nobody would have ever thought that would be the case. So is there another question?
Yeah, Joanne, I have a question. My partner and I, we bought a park together it's about 8 years ago now, and it's about 70 units in the park. And it seems like we used to agree on everything. We had all the plans that we wanted to do with the park and how we wanted to develop it. And a lot of that started, we were having a good time running the park and everything. And now it seems like we can't really seem to agree on much of anything. My partner wants to kind of seem to stay more status quo with the way the park is right now, and I would like to try to see, try to keep improving on the park, try to make it a kind of the destination park in our area for people wanting to move in, and especially like lot rent, when it comes to lot rent increases. In the market, there's room to raise the rent in the market, but my partner doesn't really want to ruffle any feathers of our current residents and just kind of stay where we're at right now. So, but I think, since there is some room to work there, and trying to make sure we have a capital to keep the park going and make improvements as needed, I'd like to try to raise our lot rent. So what advice do you have on that for me?
Well, you raised a couple of questions. One of the things I heard you say is that your partner doesn't want to ruffle anyone's feathers by raising the rent. And the other thing I heard you say was that you want to make sure that there's enough money to make improvements as needed in the park. And, a lot of, I've heard a lot of owners over the years say that their park rent is the lowest rent in the market, and they feel good about that. They don't have any debt or much debt, so they feel like, well, they can afford to keep their rent low. Also, a lot of times I hear owners say, well, they know that a lot of their owners or their tenants are on fixed incomes and can't afford a lot of increase. So here's the situation. Any park, any kind of real estate asset doesn't take care of itself. We need to invest in those parks and keep the park looking good. I can't tell you how many parks I drive through year in and year out where the owners at some point have decided they're not going to reinvest in the park. The streets are in sad shape. The trees need work. The homes look terrible. A lot of times they're not enforcing the rules. And so it really becomes an issue of the park owners sort of checking out. And it starts with the lot rent, because one of our early shows, and something I've written about in the newsletter, is that we all need to charge enough rent so that we can repair streets, we can repair sewer lines, water lines, trim the trees, hire a good manager who's going to enforce the rules. And what that does for you, even though you feel like, well, you can afford to keep the rent where it is, someday you might decide to sell it, or you and your partner might have a parting of the ways. If you're the partner who might want to sell your interest, wouldn't you want that park to be, the value to be as high as possible? And even though budgets are tight with many of our tenants, would you agree that when you have a nice looking park and the owner does invest in the park, not a ton of money every year, but they do put money back into the park, don't you think that those lot rents are easier to raise when they see that they have good management, they have good upkeep, and they feel good about living in the park? Even evicting tenants, I know there's a lot of owners who, when people get behind in their rent, they want to work with that tenant and not evict them and see if they can get caught up. And even that can kind of, usually the tenants who aren't paying their rent can also be a troublesome tenant in other ways. And that could be how they keep their home site. Those tend to be the tenants that have a lot of stuff all over their yard and on their porch and on their deck. So as you keep improving the park, and to do that, to put money into the park, you need to have your rents as at market rate. And if you don't know if your rents are at market rate, it's very simple. You can just do a rent survey, find out from your competitors what their rents are, and also find out what their vacancy is, because we're seeing less vacancy in the parks today. But I would say probably the first thing would be to have get a partnership agreement between you and your partner, and then also make the case of maybe a 3 to 5 year plan of what improvements you're anticipating will need to be done to the property. That could be probably streets for sure, trees, landscaping, sewer repairs, just whatever you think that the case may be that it's going to need to be done, and that you need to be setting money aside for that. And if you don't have a good manager, maybe it's, and by a good manager I mean somebody who's collecting 100% of the rent every month, and somebody who's enforcing the rules so that the home sites are in compliance with the park rules, that you maybe need to be looking for a new manager, and that could cost you more money. So I think if you, I would try talking to your partner about the big picture.
Okay, well, good. Thank you. There's some good advice there, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Is there another question? Since there isn't another question, I will continue with a couple of ideas about how to find a good, how to get a good partnership agreement and some of the common problems. One of the problems that can come up with in a partnership is these properties are really going up in value, and sometimes owners can refinance the property, so and take money out and either make improvements to the property, buy another property, invest in more assets for more cash flow, or they could decide, well, they're going to each, however many partners they are, they're just going to each take a portion of that refinance money and do just pay income tax on it, and then they'll have a payday. And so that is something that should be covered in a partnership agreement of how do you decide when to refinance your property. Because in my years of listing and selling parks, I've never seen a time when the lenders are as eager to make loans as they are today. And if you call your bank or any of the banks that you work with, and they're not, they seem a little standoffish about financing either a park that you want to buy or refinancing your park, just keep going. There's plenty of other banks that will roll out the red carpet to welcome you into their bank and make a loan for you on the mobile home park. So now is an excellent time to be refinancing your park if that's something that you have a reason to do. Something else we see in partnerships at times too is just the refinancing when the loan comes due. Today, even though it's a lot easier to get money to refinance a park when maybe you have a loan that's for 5 years or with a 10-year term, that's commonly what we see when people buy a park or refinance a park, they have a 5 to 10-year term. So at that point, that might be a good juncture for you and your partner to have that talk about. Do you want to stay in the partnership together? Do you want to, one of you buy the other partners out? So that, and with financing so easily available, this is an excellent time to buy out a partner. I think for many years here in the United States, we have been very spoiled by the low interest rates, and we just take them for granted. But you probably have heard your parents or grandparents talk about how high the interest rates were in the early to mid 1980s when we had the savings and loan crisis. So we had a different kind of a financial crisis than we did in 2008. And at that time, they were trying to keep inflation under control, or that was the theory with the Federal Reserve. So their action plan was, well, we'll just raise these interest rates through the roof, which they did, and we'll just tamp down these this inflation. That'll slow down inflation, which it did. So that worked, except if you were a property owner trying to buy real estate, trying to refinance real estate, trying to buy out a partner, it was really, really tough. So let's say your share, you determine the value of the property was $2 million, and you have one partner, so that means your share is worth $1 million. For your partner to go and buy you out, first of all, the odds of the partner doing the buying out to get the loan would be slim to none. I mean, the banks just really tightened up. Rates were anywhere from 13 to 21%. Especially on the farm ground, that's when we saw a lot of farmers going broke and a big consolidation in farming, because the only people who could really transact business were people with cash. So the point of this mini history lesson is not that, that we shouldn't take these low rates for granted. It looks like nothing much is going to happen to rates except for small increases, but we should assume that when you have these low interest rates and you have these enthusiastic banks wanting to make loans, eager to make loans, easy to make loans with, now is a good time to really think about, do you want to be in the partnership? Do you want to buy out your partner? Do you want to refinance? Do you want your partner to buy you out? This is an excellent time to be asking yourself those questions, because it's one thing for you to have the thought that I want to sell my interest, but it's another thing to actually be able to execute that, and the key is the financing. So I hope that is some good food for thought. I think another topic, with the partnerships is how partnerships are held. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not a CPA, but from time to time, I do find owners that still hold their real estate asset in a C corporation. And so the taxation is different on a C corporation. And today, if you were going to buy that same asset, your attorney or your accountant would probably advise you to form an S Corp or an LLC. So if you are in a C Corp, it could very well be worth your while to talk to your CPA about what would it take, what would be involved in changing to an S Corp or an LLC. It probably will make things cleaner when and if you ever do sell. And I know a lot of people that have C Corps feel like, well, they never will sell. And that's fine, but life happens, and sometimes, what we don't anticipate happening actually happens. So it will just be a cleaner thing to have probably an S Corp or an LLC for your mobile home park. So that would definitely be worth a call to your tax advisor or your attorney.
We have Ryan, who just wrote in. Ryan is from Oklahoma, and he is a little unhappy with his partner. They've owned their park for about 5 years, and when they bought the park, they had agreed to not to do park-owned homes. They didn't want anything to do with it. But Ryan just found out that his partner, Zach, is been buying the homes under his personal business, not corporate. He's wondering, should Zach have given him notice and tried to convince him, basically offered the park the right to buy the LLC the right to buy it first before he himself bought it, or because he'd already established with Zach when they started that Ryan said no, wasn't interested in it. So Ryan's interested in getting some other people's thoughts on the do's and don'ts of sidelines when it comes to partnerships. Yeah,
that's an excellent partnership question, because the time was when park owners didn't have to own any of the homes, that there were plenty of street retailers that would bring in a new home or a good pre-owned home whenever there was a vacant site. In fact, the street retailers would compete for those sites. So yeah, transparency or clarity, honesty, whatever word you want to call it, is probably a good thing if you want to park with somebody and they have a sideline business going on. That's not against the law by any means, but probably for the sake of the partnership, it would be better to tell your partner that you're going to do that, make sure they don't have a big problem with that. And, it could very well be that Ryan's partner has, no problem with that, because buying the homes does help keep the occupancy up and keep the rent coming in. The problem, potential problem, would be if those homes become vacant and Ryan doesn't keep them, if he's renting them, or even if he sold them for cash, those or sold them on a rent-to-own, those homes could become vacant for any reason. People move for all kinds of reasons, or stop paying their rent for all kinds of reasons. So the question is, if that happens, is Ryan's partner going to pay lot rent to the park, or is he going to expect a hall pass on the lot rent because he owns the park and feels like he deserves a break today on having to pay lot rent? So I can see where that could be a bone of contention. So that would be something to put in the partnership agreement too. So that's a good question, because you do find that often in partnerships where the you know, in an ideal world, if you own a mobile home park, you wouldn't own any of the homes. But life isn't like that anymore, and more park owners are buying the homes from the tenants, buying the homes from the court if there's an eviction in an abandoned home, and also buying brand new manufactured homes, mobile homes, to put into the parks and either sell them, rent them, do it rent to own, whatever the market conditions dictate. And so we don't have the luxury so much anymore of us choosing to be in the business or of home sales or out of the business. It's a real sea change from that began in about the early 2000s, where the owners, unless they didn't mind having a lot of vacant sites, they had to buy those homes. Is there another question?
Number 6 to be unmuted.
Yes,
Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. I own a mobile home park, and I want to improve the streets and a few other things, but my partner doesn't want to spend the money. What can I do to convince him that we ought to put the money into the park and its upkeep?
Sure, and I think that's, again, I think that's a very common question that people don't really consider when they buy a park. You know, a lot of times the park is in good shape, but like anything else, it needs to be updated, improved, repaired, maintained, whatever the situation is. And so, you know, to begin with, it would be helpful, again, to have the partnership agreement, but also for the partners to have a philosophy of how to operate the park. Because it is true that sometimes you go into a market, oftentimes in a market, you'll have a park that looks like the most rundown park in that market, and it charges as much rent as the nicest park in that market. And usually when you dig into it, what is found is that the park that doesn't look very good, and they're not keeping up the property, they're not fixing the streets, they're not enforcing the rules, that's owned by an investor who is not from the area, and so sort of out of sight, out of mind, where the nice park, where the streets are kept up, is usually owned by sometimes the original owners that built the park and have owned it for 30 or 40 years, and they're driving through their park every day to see what's going on. If there's a little, you know, crack in the concrete, they're all over it. And so the park is their baby. But here's the thing, so just because you have a park that needs street improvements or the rules aren't enforced, that doesn't necessarily mean that you will get more lot rent, but it could, because residents do get it when they see the owners making improvements. And it doesn't have to be hundreds of thousands of dollars like there would be with street improvements. It can be something simple like painting the sign, painting the office, making the landscape looking as nice as it can be, or adding some landscaping. Little things can, you know, can go a long way with tenants. They're not expecting you to pave the streets in 14-karat gold for it to be a good place for them to live. So, but getting back to the streets, when your residents or prospective residents drive through the park, my experience from working with a lot of park owners in my own parks is that to the degree that one keeps up these properties, you're going to attract a better clientele. And by better clientele, what I mean is people who are responsible. They don't need to make a lot of money, but they need to take paying their rent seriously. So they could be making $20,000 a year or $50,000 a year. But I'm sure we've all had tenants who make over $50,000 a year, and we have to hassle them for their rent every month, but the single mom who's making $20,000 a year, she pays her rent like clockwork. So it's not simply the amount of money that is charged for the rent. So as your property is kept up, you will be able to be more selective. Most of the park owners and even apartment owners that I talk to say that renting, whether it's sites or renting apartments, renting mobile homes, is more challenging today. There are more people that have not very good credit, or people who have other things in their background that don't meet the minimum standards for being approved as a tenant in the park. So the ultimate goal when you own a mobile home park is to have an asset that is on more or less autopilot. In other words, you're not spending one whole week out of the month or longer collecting the rent. You're not driving through the park and seeing whether it's every day or once a month or twice a year, however often it is, and seeing the home sites look like a disaster and vicious dogs running all over the place and just junk lying around and signs that aren't painted and grass that needs to be cut and just the place looking very unattractive. You want that tenant, when they drive through there, to subconsciously be thinking, if I live here, they're going to make me, they're going to enforce the rules. There are tenants who do actually look for places that aren't very well kept up because they feel like they'll not anything goes in that property. So the ultimate goal is for your property to be as much as possible on automatic pilot, where people are paying their rent, they're following the guidelines for living there, keeping their home site cleaned up. So we're just about out of time, and I want to thank everybody for being on the call today. Next week, we have a special guest, Ken Rischel. Ken Rischel is the chairman of the Illinois Manufactured Housing Association. Ken has owned many parks. He's been involved in many partnerships. He teaches a course on selling mobile homes in the parks that keeps people in compliance with the Dodd-Frank law, so people know what to do and what not to do and are legal and in compliance. So be thinking of your questions for next week for Ken. And don't forget to check the website for the newsletter. And if you want us to mail you or email you the newsletter, just let us know, 319-378-6786, and we'll be happy to do that. Thanks, everybody.